I feel fortunate to be moderating what appears as a very, very power-packed panel. And I do not know whether it was by design or by destiny that this concluding session of sorts seems to be a wonderful melting pot of all the deliberations that we have had during the day. I think the regulator session to start with was a very useful sort of a perspective, and the right amount of balance between investor caution is also giving some sort of scope for product innovation to happen. We spent some time on real estate as well. Real estate internationally gets the maximum amount of allocations, also ended up getting a disproportionate amount of mind share today. Not only did we spend some time on the REITs and the trends to expect there, but also in terms of how real estate has benefited from the structured mezzanine debt that's been made available to them. We also had a dedicated, very dedicated session on private equity, which discussed the various facets and across early stage, venture capital, late growth stage, and also with ITP, the exits becoming a lot better. With the public market buoyancy, the exits becoming, the visibility being there. So that was received very well as well. Category 3, the hedge fund, the category which we discussed in the morning, where the long only and some of the other strategies, the long short equities that have been launched, and what is the future going forward. It was noted that liquid alternatives space globally seems to be on the verge of a huge explosion. We've started just about scratching the surface, and I'm sure there's a lot more coming our way. Now, coming back to the session and on the agenda on hand, there's very detailed. I don't think any of my illustrious panelists would need any sort of introduction. There's a detailed one that's already been provided. But I would like to kickstart this discussion with Nishith Bhai, I think the man who has probably done the most amount of work and widely looked up to for advice on all aspects pertaining to AI. And I was just discussing with him before the session, given the amount of interaction that Mr. Desai has with government, with the regulator, with the investors, I believe we've met about 150 odd GPs and LPs in the last 2 weeks itself. Before we get specific to AI, what do you think are the broad macro environment trends that you've seen? And it will also be great to hear while we discuss the thinking, because I'm sure you've also influenced the way in which regulation and the thinking has gone behind in this country. What do you foresee as trends at the margin on regulation side?
Too many things in one particular. So you gave me 3 minutes, but I'll take it that it's Indian Standard Time, 3 minutes. Hope you don't mind that. Okay, I'm so happy that a lawyer has been given the last word here, of course, along with other group of people. But I thank everyone for sitting here throughout the day and listening to us. My relationship, I won't give my affair, with the industry has been pretty old now. And what I saw way back in mid-90s and early 90s, today's scene has changed a lot. Okay, I was fortunate enough to associate with the first FI, first private equity, first venture capital, part of SEBI's committee on Chandrasekhar's committee and all that kind of stuff. At that point of time, we did not have good managers in India. Okay, and when Pradeep Shah got 1 crore rupee salary, it was on the front page of journal, which was Business India or something like that. Remember? And today, if you offer 1 crore to Arpita, she'll say, what this is about. Am I right? Okay. But we have come a long way today. And I'm very excited that in spite of all the barriers that have been there with us, industry has grown. Industry has grown a lot. So we have deep management expertise today. Unfortunately, we have not actively encouraged management industry so much. If we remove some of the hurdles, such as permanent establishment issues and so forth, some of my colleagues who are also experts on the subject will talk to you about. If we remove some of those hurdles, that itself is an incentive. We're not asking for anything else. For example, pass-through. Nowhere in the world I have seen pass-through as an issue even. UK, US, Singapore, wherever you go, it is non-issue. Here it's a major issue. Whereas first meeting, somewhere in mid-90s, at Chandrasekhar committee, we had recommended pass-through, and it was given. Now, pass-through is not given. It already exists in the law. If some of you know technical section 61 to 63, revocability, as well as 161 to 164 sections, they clearly, if you comply with those, there is already a pass-through. All that people are asking that, please do not trouble at a lower level. So difficulty is not at higher level. If you look at the history of the pass-through, it started with AIG decision. Prior to that, there was HES Nizam's judgment, where also it was said that when the shares are ascertainable, beneficiary is identifiable, pass-through is there. Then after AIG was, that judgment was Supreme Court retired judge delivers, advance ruling, that was done. Then after recently ICICI judgment came, it also repeated the same thing. What is happening at the lowest level, they deny some of these benefits which are legitimately available. So first 5 years you have to go through the trouble. There is no ambiguity in law by and large. Okay? And what happened was ambiguity was created by the clarification which was sought to be given. So clarification resulted in ambiguous circular, and that's what has caused a lot of problems. But if I may just step aside that situation, all that we need to do is to clarify so that lower level we are not troubled. What happens when you write a PPM? One of the things, if you have to write that there is a litigation risk, the moment people hear litigation, international in particular, they think now they are there forever. Because in India, litigation doesn't end simply because, you have this life and the next life. So you can continue litigation forever. And that is what is a bigger threat. So that is something that is required. Other thing that I see, that was just coming back to the trends, I'm seeing huge amount of interest in India again. Last year, some private equity funds like Summit Partners, and they wound up from India practically. They say it's no longer worth looking at it. Suddenly everybody is looking back. She mentioned I addressed some 150, 200 GPs and other people. They are very enthusiastic, but most of them, lot of them are waiting at the door to get the things cleared. Now, who will invest as a foreign investor if you do not have a pass-through status here? They will say, rather we come directly. Okay, so that is the thing. Other thing is that in terms of trends, what we see, even LPs are becoming more cautious. That you have more experience than me. I'm not managing funds. I only advise. But the legal side, they want to come often directly now. Okay, that's management fees are under great pressure within the US, and the same trend would also happen here. And environment globally has changed. US is beginning to look better and better. So a lot of investment is going on that side. So these are some of the things I see. What I see the trend going forward is that there is a lot of positivity. At least I feel that government will bring a lot more clarity in the times to come. But on a ground level, when I met with a number of bureaucrats, including finance secretaries and other people, there are two views prevalent, and they are working at conflict. There is one section which wants to tax at an entity level, okay? And they say, we'll not tax you, like a partnership or a company. That's one segment. Second segment understand, no, there must be a clear pass-through. And there is some disconnect between the bureaucrats, and there are all different views going around. I think this is what we really need to fix in, that what is the objective? The objective is to just a clarity. And this issue is very, very important. Other thing that we are seeing is that, the new style of now writing PPM. So far we looked at SEBI regulation. I'll close on this, I know. So far we saw that, you look at SEBI regulations and articulate a PPM in light of the SEBI regulations and the disclosures and stuff like that. Now when you have investors coming particularly from the Europe, you have to look at AIFMD regulations. And that's what, it has number of different features including non-discrimination and stuff like that. I won't go into detail. I will need another session. But we need to now move up the value chain in the way in which you do your PPMs. That also becomes a marketing document because your standards need to go up next. And finally, a point in terms of fund directors. We have seen a lot of interesting developments lately. In last couple of years, there was judgment in Cayman, from Cayman Grand Court, and $111 million per director were awarded to the LPs, because they say that as a director you don't necessarily have to attend meetings and do it, but what is more important is also what you do in between the meetings. Okay, so those things are coming up, And director's role is fund director. I'm not talking about portfolio company director. But that is something that we need to really learn as to what is the responsibility of fund director vis-a-vis the fund compared to a normal company and where your interest lies. So including, for example, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and I'll close definitely after this statement, that if you are investing in a real estate project, you tell promoter or somebody, you buy land and do whatever you do, and then we enter into this. This is a typical way, because everybody knows some black monies are paid or some corruption goes on and stuff like that. Now, what is a director's liability? When you enter the company, you say it was bought for 30 crores. Today, we are valuing it at 100 crores. Within 1 year, what has happened to make the value go up by 70 crores? So therefore, is there a duty on the part of a director to look into that and see, was there everything done right, or you implicitly blessed it and were negligent in not doing FCPA clearances or Bribery Act clearances or stuff like that? And that is what is causing a lot of issues. We have already begun to see some litigations. I won't go into the detail, but funds are now facing litigations internationally. And I think I will stop with that at the moment.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for packing in a huge amount of perspective in a very, very short time. You mentioned a lot of very important points. I'll pick up something that sounded music to my ears in terms of the positive economic interest that you saw from the various investors that you interacted with. But the whole point on the certainty and clarity of the regime, especially on the tax and the regulatory side, gets me, sir, to you, Mr. Pranav Sayta, who is also an institution in his own right on the overall business, whether it be tax, structuring, regulator, investor-wise. So, and we were discussing this as well. So, what do you think? And the point that Mr. Desai mentions that may not be so much of ambiguity, but perhaps it does not trickle down to the lowest level of people who are interpreting and executing it. How do you think we deal with this?
Right. So, I really would put this into two baskets, two broad baskets. One is the regime, the law, the regulation as it stands today. And I do feel that there's a lot that can be done to bring about clarity, certainty in the tax regime. And the other, of course, is the bucket of how well that law is administered, how fairly, how reasonably the law is administered at the ground level. But if we look at the legislation today, admittedly, I do feel that there's a lot of room for bringing about far greater clarity in what the revenue really wants, what the government really wants in terms of how this particular category of investors have to be taxed. Right. And this debate has been going on for quite some time. The sad part is, on the one hand, the government does accept the fact that they want to bring about stability and predictability in the tax law, certainty and clarity in the tax law, a non-adversarial, tax-payer-friendly regime and so on. But I don't see right now the regime still being completely clear as to how such investors are going to be taxed. Even the circular that has come out just a few months back, maybe August 2014, does not seem to bring about any enhanced clarity or certainty. In fact, if at all, it creates more confusion than what was already prevailing. Yes, when it comes to AIFs, we are told that category 1 venture capital undertaking investments will clearly get a pass-through benefit. That is very clear, and hopefully that's done and dusted. But there's a whole lot of the others, category 2 or even in category 1, the remaining category 3. We are not too sure right now what the government's thinking is on how these are going to be taxed. Yes, there has been a regime for taxation of trusts in this income tax law for the last decade, several decades. And it has two different regimes, one for a fixed and determinate trust, the other for a discretionary trust. Again, we have some regime where there is a business carried on and so on. Clearly, when there is no pass-through specifically provided in the law itself, as is the case for category 1 venture capital undertaking investments, taxpayers have tried to ensure that they fall within a regime which has been in place for several decades and try to structure themselves as a fixed and determinate trust and say that taxation has to therefore be in the like manner and to the same extent as is applicable to the beneficiaries. The result, however, has been that the regime itself has been litigating on the point as to whether this particular trust is really a fixed and determinate trust. and whether it therefore qualifies for that benefit or it is a discretionary trust taxable at the maximum marginal rate. To add to the confusion, right now the circular seems to say that the names of the beneficiaries and the exact beneficial interest of each should be specified in the original trust deed at the time of creation itself. I'm not too sure that the exact nuances of how this business is conducted has been fully appreciated. And so long as there is a clarity on who gets how much and there is a clear formula provided in the trust deed, what can be the objection of the revenue? I don't really understand why there should be an objection. So one, I would feel that clarity will go a long way in improving the business environment. And if we are talking of enhancing, investments into India, if we are talking of promoting investments, if we are talking of financial sector savings being given a fillip, kick-starting the investment cycle and whatever have you, this becomes extremely critical as to how exactly they propose to tax it. Of course, consultants like us will still find ways to bring about as much clarity and certainty and protect our tax-paying clients, so to say, to the extent possible. So there have been cases where taxpayers have then argued this is a revocable transfer, and since it is a revocable transfer, the tax has to be on the investor community. The India Advantage Fund recent decision of the tribunal has, to that extent, endorsed that position. So in terms of what finally will happen, even if this circular exists, there are clear Supreme Court precedents which say that a circular which is not correct is not binding on taxpayers. But the problem is it is binding on the revenue authority. He will seek to tax a certain situation in the manner in which the circular seems to refer to it, without realizing what the ramifications from an overall economic standpoint of scaring away investors is. Finally, even though at the tribunal level, like in India Advantage Fund or various other situations, the taxpayer might succeed, but that takes 5-7 years, and in the meantime, the amount of uncertainty, pain, harassment that gets created shows India in a very negative light. So I think if adequate representations are made by all stakeholders put together, that here is a situation where there is no problem in paying one layer of tax, no one disagrees with that, and everyone seems to agree that double taxation is not intended, then that's where we need to go. And a clear definition of what the pass-through status will be, especially where the investor is coming from a treaty jurisdiction which is non-taxable. What the maximum marginal rate would be, especially if it's a long-term capital gain which is subject to tax at a much lower rate. All these things create a lot of uncertainty, and given the way in which our administrative setup is, which is not always the most fair and reasonable at the ground level, a very clear legislation and regulation with the circular from the highest level of the tax authority, I think would go to a very large extent and to a long way in promoting investments in this sector. So I would feel, yes, the legislation is not clear, the administration is unfair. At least the legislation and regime in this new government, I think there is a lot of readiness to listen, and probably a clear regime, clear legislation, clear regulation will go a long way in improving even the administration of that particular law.
I think thank you, sir, for commenting on something which is possibly on everyone's mind in the room today. The industry is sort of struggling with how to go about interpreting between the circular and the precedent that was there.
Right. And as I said, even now we would be confident that we would succeed any which way. Right. But the question is, do we need to put taxpayers to these 5-7 years of litigation?
Absolutely.
And go through complex structuring and so meticulous in terms of what it writes, and then you say, litigation can't be ruled out, that scares away investors and so on. Those are the things that need to be streamlined.
No, absolutely. So that is becoming a huge, huge challenge in the fundraise, from a fundraise point of view.
Right, exactly.
And on taxation, Tushar, you also amongst one of the go-to guys handling about the majority of taxation issues in AIF. This is something I'm sure you've been questioned a lot on. What could be your take on that?
I think as Nishith and Pranav mentioned, the key of the crux of the issue we see, that we are dealing with alternative investment, which effectively as a fund manager, you are in a fiduciary capacity, you are managing third-party money. So your ability to take risk as such and your ability to get into litigation as such is very minimal. Means you can't get into 5 years of litigation, you exit, and you have uncertainty on taxation or the gains they have made. you distributed money to your LPs, and then you are settled with the litigation. So the issue is that the alternative investment regime requires that level of certainty from the government in terms of manner with the taxation of the whole industry works. And if you look at the law in past, if you look at alternative investment taxation before 2008, there was a clear pass-through under, if it goes a little technical, under 115 and 1023 FB, the industry understands that, which gives a clear pass-through. Now, unfortunately, the then finance minister thought it's an exemption and actually took away that pass-through. There was no need. At the end of it, if you look at the trust taxation, as Pranav mentioned, there is only a one level of tax. The industry is not asking for any concession at the end of it. We are agreeing to the fact that there is one level of tax. Now, in fact, Mr. Pranav Mukherjee, before in his last budget, did correct that situation, giving pass-through to the entire industry. But unfortunately, then SEBI came out with the new regime on alternative investment. So there is a kind of a communication gap, if I was to say, between within the regulator and the ministry, and it does create a lot of confusion. The industry has been working for this issue for a long period of time. I would say almost like 5 years, and still we, because of the change in bureaucracy, we haven't been able to successfully argue before the bureaucrats that it's not that any concession is being asked by the industry. We are asking for clarity in law, which is what which has been asked for. Now, other issue is that the government need to understand the role the alternatives play in the economic development. Now, today, the alternatives in terms of private equity and venture capital promotes entrepreneurship. Today, the guys where the venture capital is funding or the private equity is funding is the guys who are not able to raise bank finance. And that's a mode of capital. Now, you look at the Flipkart story or a Snapdeal story, you could say from where the whole growth of the industry happened because of the alternative funding. So government to understand. So if you look at the last budget, where the finance minister did say, okay, there is a need for clarity in respect of portfolio investment on the FI side, that the characterization is an issue, and a lot of fund managers are sitting abroad, want to operate from India, but they are not coming here because of this tax issue. And then he announced, okay, the characterization for FI investment will be on form of capital gain and will not tax as a business income. Now, as you know, stock market as such is a hot money. Means while a lot of it does have long-term perspective, but even there is a short-term perspective. But in case of private equity and alternative, it is purely long-term money. So why is there no clarity on that front? That should be the first one to be addressed. That why not give clarity in respect to saying that the private equity and venture capital will be treated as capital gain and not business income. Now, in respect of fund managers, also today, as you may be aware, in terms of offshore fund, a lot of these fund managers sitting in places like Singapore or outside India, and if you ask the fund manager, the main issue is tax, why they're sitting abroad, because everybody wants to be near to the deal, right? If you ask a manager, if there was no tax and there was no regulation, where would you base yourself? He would say, I would be near to the deal where I can talk to the promoter, and Amit will talk about more when he's been on both sides of the spectrum for that matter. So I want to be here near to the deal. Now, because of the tax issue of forcing people outside, two things happen. One is they're losing revenue on these individuals, right? They are the one who are the GPs making both management fee, carry, on their individual accounts. And you're losing that revenue to a country like Singapore, for that matter, who's promoting offshore fund manager as a big regime. They're giving safe harbor. They're saying that if you're sitting in Singapore and managing offshore fund, we'll not treat you as a permanent establishment of that fund in Singapore. We'll give you special regimes in terms of lower tax rate from 17 to 10%. Why can't India do the same thing? Now, the finance minister did try and address that issue, but only in part. Only addressed FI, only addressed the characterization issue. So today, the manager for FI sitting here can say, okay, I don't have a permanent establishment risk because my character is only capital gain. But what about the treaty entitlement? Today, India is almost on a verge of introducing a general anti-avoidance rule. We'll have to see what happens to the GAR when it comes to 1st April 2015. But if the GAR gets implemented, you'll be questioned with, do you have substance in the jurisdiction in which you're operating? Now, if your manager is sitting here, how do you establish that you have substance in offshore jurisdiction? So the government needs to deal the issue in holistic, in a holistic manner, means they have to apply to all the issues which are relevant to it, to say, okay, we'll come out with a safe harbor regime, we'll give you the treaty benefit, let the manager sit here, manage the offshore fund. We are earning the revenues out of the management fee, we are earning revenues out of the carry taxation of these individuals, we are getting more capital in the country. So it solves the issue completely. So, but I think the government is to look at this, bring in the certainty that, that the industry is asking for. The industry is not asking for any tax concession. With that, I think that's what is required.
I think thanks, Tushar. Listening to Nishith by Mr. Sayta, Tushar, it's abundantly clear that if there was serious money that we wanted to attract from in this route, in this space, certainty and clarity, especially in the regime and the taxation, would be something that will given and that will be a key. There are a lot of industry representations being made, and if there's someone listening out there, I think it's about time that we started pay. You know, there's something that gets done seriously about it. Mr. Maheshwari, I'm coming to you now. Especially as someone who comes with a corporate who clearly sees a significant opportunity in AI space, you've made some inroads in the Category 1 infrastructure fund. What has been your, what's been the thinking behind it? Because, you know, when you were exploring the various places that you could be present in, why would you choose one or the other? And at the margin, how do you see things panning out?
So, thanks. I think it's very nice to hear that different lawyers and tax people are on the same page. And with respect to the predictability issue, because I think this is where, which is actually concerning all investors, GPs alike. So I would probably touch upon the issue as to why L&T got into this space as a GP. So at one end, L&T has put up prop projects, as we call it. You know, we have a prop book with about 30,000 crores of project investments. And equity now valued at about 10,000 crores. We've had, over a period of last 10 or 15 years, a return over net worth of about 14 to 16%. Okay, and these are hardcore infrastructure projects. So we had managed our own money. So that was one experience on the equity side. There is hardly any large project that we have not engineered or we have not done something with respect to engineering. So I think there was a huge amount of, shall we say, project and project management experience. So that's the implementation work. And then we in financial services we want to be in all the areas of financial services. So we are already there in project finance and corporate finance. And one of the key set of clients that we have been focusing on for the last 7, 8 years are what I call as emerging players. And we realized that these emerging players, so on the client side, there was a requirement that they needed equity. And they felt that participation by somebody like L&T in their equity actually brings them up in the financial system and gets them better access to more equity and more debt. So that's how we said we will use our project finance experience, which again, by the way, takes 10 to 15-year calls, less like private equity does, and our own prop equity experience, and try and marry that knowledge and create an equity fund. And we would seed first our own GP fund. In the first one that we've already launched is Infra. The domestic institutional raising has happened. It's one of the, probably the only fund in the last maybe 2 or 3 years which has been able to raise institutional money. And we said, now because we've got the institutional due diligence done, so maybe we might be able to inspire confidence in what you call it, family offices or large high net worth investors to come in. We said, look, infra funds are really 10-year funds. Okay. But investors are probably looking for smaller tenors also. And we saw there is another opportunity in real estate. So again, we are looking more on the development side. We're not looking so much on operating assets. We're looking at more brownfield. And we introduced another class where he saw there's a lot of mezz opportunity. We think there are a lot of good emerging players who feel that the markets will be better and they might get better valuation. But they're willing to go for mezz, and that returns that we are able to get out of that are good enough for certain class of investors who are looking at short. So essentially we said we would offer, now there's a market demand, but there's also a demand from the liability side, or let's say the contributors side, the investors side, Whereas we are able to give them products between 5 to 10 years. And so if somebody wants to invest with us as a fund manager, 100 crores, probably he could do 30, 30, 30 in 3 different kind of portfolios and look at his portfolio. So I think that was one of the key things that we looked at, and we have entered into this. It's still an easier, a fairly new beginning, but we've started to book assets. We said, okay, we'll commit our own money and we'll start booking assets and we'll look for investors later on. So that's one. Just one last bit, I think, since we talked about investors, I'll just touch upon that actually in this entire space, there are a lot of fund managers who probably are willing, because the investors obviously want some returns, probably end up overcommit themselves in return. And I think that's what happened with several investors who have gone, they've committed, and they're today not able to give threshold returns. So I think it's very important for investors to actually discern the right fund managers, because there is something, there is a credibility thing as to what is the minimum threshold I want, but somebody is promising me great, and you need to think about how is that guy actually going to deliver. So I think one of the problems that seem to have happened in the last few years with several investors not getting the kind of expected return is that they fell for the mirage of very high returns promise. I think so. That's one. And the last thing on the government thing, which we talked about when we talked to international investors, and Nishith Bhai will bear me out. The guys overseas, in the time India got its act messed up, we drove money away from India to Indonesia. We have to remember that global investors, and now even Indian family offices are kind of approaching global investors. They look at investing overseas. If we are not going to create the market climate here, in fact, it was Kumar Mangalam who said, I think I must invest overseas. If industrialists were kind of family offices anyway, and Indian high net worth individuals start thinking that India is not safe enough and we need to invest overseas, I think we are missing the bus. Somewhere, the economic policy and desire to have more investment and the revenue orientation that we have at the implementation level, as it's been said, it is not synchronous, and realizes that while we may be wanting to earn more, in the long run we are earning less because we are driving away investors elsewhere. So I think India has to remember that it's just another product in the World Committee of Nations.
Thank you, sir, for your very detailed comments. I think the two things which stand out and which I think will give, again, I'm choosing to listen things which cheer me up, which is, about the only category where you're getting institutional participation. And that's an experience that none of us have had on the AIF space apart from infrastructure. So possibly the credibility, some bit of a track record. There is India as well bucking the trend where institutional investors will start looking at it. And the other very, very important point that you mentioned about anchoring investor expectations in terms of risk and return, comparing A vis-a-vis B, and then sort of evaluating that. I'm not now coming to you, sir, Mr. Patni, the investor voice and a GP in your own right. First, on specific, because a lot of us are in the room also the financial intermediaries and would like to understand, in terms of the experience with AI and in terms of you leading the family office piece, what are the considerations that go in? Are you comfortable with the due diligence? Are you comfortable with what you see there? Would you have the confidence to go ahead? And therefore, if you were to look at the landscape currently, what is it that sounds exciting for you to actually go ahead and commit capital?
Sure. Thank you, Arpita. And so we as a family office, traditionally we do a portfolio allocation where we look at the risk return profile of each of the family member depending on his age and how old is he, and starting from the children and the medium age and the high age. We do a lot of work on that, and we tend to, I think predominantly the family offices tend to be more secure investing in liquid assets, which traditionally have been debt and equity, and again in equity you have mutual funds and you have the debt, many instruments in the debt. In the last few years there have been a lot of products which have come on the alternative investments. Of course, traditionally you had the PMSs where we had the equity PMS which we looked at, where you could see the track record of the fund manager. If he was performing well and then he was doing the correct stock picking, you would back him. And that slowly has come in-house with the family offices which are large enough to have their own fund managers. Although we yet run external PMSs, but we also have our own stock picking. And then there have been a lot of alternative products which have come in the market, on the derivatives, the hedge fund, you have the Nifty futures which we have done, the silver and gold arbitrage commodities. But many of these products have not really performed that well because the market in India on derivative is very small, and I don't think they are growing large enough to be able to give any consistent return as would the international markets give. To your question, we have an exposure to alternative investments. Of course, some of the exposure is because we have anchored our own funds. So we have a venture fund, which we became a GP and LP. We have equity long product, and we also run some other incubators in the big data space. But we look at a lot of fund managers who come to us, showcase their products. N number of real estate products come to us, which we look into it, private equity, growth capital, and we look into the track record of the fund manager, the previous track record, right, and how much exits have happened in India. One of the issues which we see in the alternative investments is the exits are not happening, because in India we have seen only last 10 years where a lot of funds are yet not exited fully. Right. And so we don't know whether what will be the real track record, because unless they return money back, and that has been one of the apprehensions the family offices have, whether when the money is going to come back. One is the long duration, which is 10 years, 8 plus 2, which seems to be very long. So there are some real estate funds which have now come with products which are like 3 years, and there's been recent one in the market which is a venture debt fund, which is again talking about making a 3-year fund. So the size of the term of the the AIF or the fund size is important for us when we look into it. Also, private equity and venture fund, they are locked in. So there's another issue which family offices have. They don't like to see a lock-in. So some of the new AIFs which have come on the liquid side, they are probably doing better because there's a monthly redemption or quarterly redemption. The problem in India, as all of you have mentioned, is that there are too many products out there, and we are not able to. I would say one of the main issues is how do we, which I have been working on since the last many years, how do I diversify my portfolio into a global portfolio? I think that is one of the key concerns which I have, is with the rupee, which will go on depreciating with the high import content which India has, and the high dependence on balance of payments. And I think dollar is going to remain a strong currency over the next couple of decades. So as an investor, how do I diversify my portfolio where it is a global asset base and I'm not dependent fully on India? Because in India, again, there is a limitation what you can do, and there are a lot of constraints, as already mentioned by the eminent panelists. You have a tax regime, you have execution risk, you have changing policies, and so one of the things which we need to when we talk to the government is how do you make your rupee more convertible, and there are a lot of opportunities on overseas. So we are looking at overseas opportunities. We already have some investments on the venture side in real estate, but some of them have, like some family offices like the Premji Invest, who have gone in a big way by announcing huge amount of their family office into investing overseas.
Overseas in real
I
estate.
believe even Narayan Murthy family office is investing a lot in real estate overseas. So I think that is also one of the considerations which one has to look from the government angle, is how to make it more proactive for us, because otherwise you'll find that you'll have so many fund managers in India selling local products, but you'll have limitations on how well you can do them. So I think this is what I feel we keep looking into. But alternative investments is here to stay, I think, and we hope that government will, look at making it more regulation-wise, more smoother as we go on.
Thank you, sir, for very comprehensive sort of comments, and I think you seem to be a lot more comfortable with the public markets or the liquid strategies than the liquid ones, where any which way is the experience. So far, the investing experience overall has not been extremely positive. I don't know if you agree, but I feel, sir, we've possibly not done justice to the time that we have with you. So if we can close with your comments on what is the wish list for the industry. There seems to be a lot of optimism in terms of money that can come in, clarity, and everything gets talked about.
Yeah, about 3 or 4 points. Number one, a pass through, we talked about it a lot. There's a clear expectation. It's no go otherwise, Number two, as far as foreign investors are concerned, clarity on PE. Okay, that there will be no unnecessary, charge of having a PE and therefore taxation of those entities. So that's a second thing that we see. Third is, I think, expectation of the industry is that now we should also open up in a manner, even approvals for investment in the Indian AIF is also a little bit of an issue. At times you have to go to FIPB and stuff like that. We need to clear up those kind of hurdles. And finally, it's a little, unrealistic in some ways, but there is a need for Indian venture capital funds and private equity funds to be allowed to invest in overseas assets. Today, that is another thing that is, because you need to learn how to invest abroad, you need to diversify risk and those kind of things. There are a lot of wish lists, but I want to stop here at this point, including, for example, corporate law. I can go on for another half an hour, but we really need to refine those kind of things. Fortunately, this Shell case, Vodafone case, last one, AGS said that, okay, let's not appeal. And I hope tax department would accept that. It will go a long way. It will go a long way to re-establish our credibility that we mean business in India. Otherwise, enthusiasm is very high. If we don't tap it within next few months, perhaps we'll miss boat again. So that would be my...
Thank you, sir. And one last thing with you, Mr. Sayta. Apart from the other things, I think you're also amongst the last word on advice to family businesses. And from an allocation point of view, what is it that you're hearing on alternative assets from an interest point of view?
Right, so increasingly, we've been seeing that Indian families are looking to invest in a structured manner in this space as well, whereas traditionally they have never really gone about investing in this space. I think increasingly they are realizing that there is an opportunity here, and if we give more clarity, certainty, if we give it some form of structure, I think that can be taken forward to a very large extent. The point to be noted here is, apart from the fact of reward, returns, and so on, the most important, and apart from the fact that it's a method of asset allocation, diversification in some sense from the same routine liquid markets or mutual funds, whatever. The main point really is India has always been traditionally a very capital-starved country, on the one hand. And on the other hand, I feel one of the key features of the Indian ecosystem is the rich base of entrepreneurs. Now, if we put these two together, a capital-starved country and a rich base of entrepreneurs, really one has to tap this well in order to unleash India's full potential. So I think it's already started. If we provide the right framework, the right regime, I think it will go a long way in promoting India's growth.
I think couldn't have said better, the source of capital on one end and the capital-starved economy in the other. If the conduit is made clearer, then it'll get a lot, system
Absolutely.
gets a lot
And we
more
keep
efficient.
talking about foreign investments, of X billion dollars, 10, 20, 30, whatever it might be. We are talking of an economy which is close to $2 trillion now.
Right.
And with a 30% plus savings rate, we can imagine we are talking of some $600 billion of savings on a $2 trillion GDP economy. That is the kind of potential that is there for investment to make. So I think it's huge if we tap it right, if we direct it in the right manner. There's a huge fillip to growth that can come through this model.
Aditya, I don't know if we have time for taking a couple of questions. Yeah. So with this sort of a panel, I'm sure there are a whole lot of questions that you may want to ask, and I think we can take about 3 to 4 questions. It'll be great if any of you want to raise.
You're very clear. So there is no we at least remove confusion, whatever remains.
What you said was right. We have this problem. We have a company in Nirvana which we want to invest in California, and our application is pending with SEBI because you cannot invest directly.
Yeah, you only have 10%, which is very,
Plus,
very
you
low.
have to take SEBI approval to
That's correct.
invest from a fund overseas. So it's quite painful.
In fact, there is a lot of interest in e-commerce, pharma, healthcare, etc. But on infrastructure, still, of course, you know better than I know and you have successfully done something, so that shows your exclusive. But in general, people are very concerned about infrastructure. One other point, we all talk about make in India, but let us not be unrealistic. In my personal view, I could be completely wrong, it will take 7 to 12 years by the time we really see in manufacturing picking up. Second, we should avoid getting into too low cost, like nano for a car. Personally, nothing, was not a great idea. But Jaguar was a great idea. How will you compete with China with all the infrastructure, all the regimental way in which the whole workforce happens? Here we are more creativity, and the freedom of speech and expression allows us to be more creative. So when it comes to highly, what is called complex manufacturing, that is where we'll succeed. As Harvard Business Review has indicated in this last issue, Internet of Everything, right? That is where we will succeed. We'll need to, what you call, sell product as a service. That is where we'll succeed. So developing, somebody talked about social businesses, that is going to be the huge potential because India has great scalability. So social businesses can be experimented, cost of failing is low, but scalability is high, and you say whether it was microfinance, SKS to many other ones, the businesses are done extremely well overall. So what we need to develop is new institutions, including listing of the social businesses because they have multiple bottom line and all those kind of things. We develop new mergers and acquisitions in the NGO sector, and I can go on and on. But 50% of global philanthropy is likely to go into pharma sector, healthcare, I would say. 30% in education, 20% in museums and stuff like that, which are all important. So we have to really focus on healthcare and education in a big way. And that is where the pool of money would also go in. But you've got great opportunity, which is very unique to India in many ways, that largest number of NGOs perhaps exist in India. Okay? And at the same time, we have an ability to develop new business models which can be exported to Africa or Bangladesh and other countries. So I would think that that's where our focus can be. And the upside is pretty high, and social impact will be very high. So those are some of the observations I would have.
Again, a very important point, sir. Ultimately, what you're saying is we play to our strengths and not try to be everything to everyone.
Yeah.
And there's inherent strengths that India has, and perhaps consolidating on that makes a lot more sense than trying and getting into everything possible. With that, I think we've come to the end of this panel discussion. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and a very, very valuable, insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I would like to now request Mr. Aditya Gadke to come on to the dais and felicitate our panelists. I would request Ms. Arpita Vinay to kindly join him in the felicitation.